Midsummer of 1942. The dawn steppes, usually filled with the chirping of grasshoppers and the smell of wormwood, now trembled with a different, heavy and rhythmic hum. The earth vibrated, as if warning of an impending catastrophe. This was not a thunderstorm, although the horizon was black with smoke. This was Army Group South on the move, renamed and reorganized for a decisive strike. Operation Blau entered its active phase, and millions of tons of steel, gasoline, and human will surged eastward. German strategists, hunched over maps in distant headquarters, drew thick blue arrows pointing to the Caucasus and the Volga. The city of Voronezh on these maps looked merely like an auxiliary point, a convenient hinge on which German defenses were to rest, covering the flank of the main group advancing towards Stalingrad. None of them could imagine that this point on the map would become an insurmountable cliff against which the wave of invasion would break, and that it was here that time, so precious for the Blitzkrieg, would stop for 212 days and nights. In those first days of July, the city lived a strange, dual life. On the one hand, factories were working, children were playing in parks, and trams ran on schedule, creating an illusion of normality. On the other hand, the air was already electrified with anxiety. Echelons with equipment were leaving for the east, and foreign planes with crosses on their wings appeared more and more often in the sky. When the advanced tank units of the Wehrmacht broke through the defenses and rushed to the outskirts, it came as a shock to many residents. The speed of the German offensive was staggering. The dust raised by the tracks of Hoth's 4th Panzer Army obscured the sun, turning a clear July day into twilight. The enemy burst into the right bank of the city suddenly, seizing streets where the traces of peaceful life had not yet cooled. However, it was at this moment, when it seemed that panic was inevitable and the defense had collapsed, that the first miracle of Voronezh occurred. The city's garrison, consisting of NKVD units, militiamen, and scattered army units, did not flee. They met the enemy not as an organized army on the battlefield, but as an enraged swarm defending its nest. The battles were fought not for trench lines, but for specific intersections, for tram depots, for every solid house. In the Studgorodok area, where the Agricultural Institute was located, the battle immediately took on a fierce character. The institute buildings, standing on high ground, turned into fortresses. Here, among classrooms and laboratories, Soviet soldiers held back the onslaught of elite German units, gaining precious hours for organizing defenses on the left bank of the Voronezh River. The river became the dividing line that split the city and the very history of the battle into before and after. Soviet sappers, displaying incredible composure under heavy artillery fire and airstrikes, blew up the bridges. The Vograsovsky and Chernovsky bridges collapsed into the water, cutting off the path of German tanks to the left bank. The city was dissected. The right, elevated part, the old center, came under the control of the occupiers. The left, industrial part, remained in the hands of Soviet troops. From this moment on, a positional war began, whose intensity and density of fire were not inferior to the most famous battles in world history. The Germans, accustomed to maneuver warfare, found themselves drawn into what they themselves horrifyingly called rat warfare. There was no front line in the usual sense here. The front ran through walls, through floor slabs, through sewer pipes. Life in the destroyed city, now on the front line, turned into a surreal existence at the edge of human capabilities. Those residents who did not manage to evacuate from the right bank became hostages of the war. Their lives moved underground. Basements, cellars, and crevices became their only home. People learned to live in complete darkness, distinguishing the time of day not by the sun, but by the intensity of shelling. Water became more precious than gold. The water supply was destroyed in the first days, and every trip for water turned into a special operation. Women and teenagers, tied with empty milk cans, crawled to the river at night, trying not to rattle the dishes. German snipers and machine gunners kept the coastline under constant aim, opening fire at any sound or movement. Often, the price of a bucket of murky river water was equal to a human life. Hunger became a constant companion for those who remained in the ruins. Food supplies quickly ran out. People boiled glue soup, searched for surviving grains in elevators under crossfire, stripped bark from trees in parks. But even in these inhumane conditions, remnants of humanity and mutual assistance persisted. In deep basements, a kind of commune was created where the last piece of cracker was shared, where the wounded and sick were cared for. The remaining doctors and nurses, lacking medicines, used improvised means, washed bandages in cold water, performed miracles, saving lives by the light of makeshift lamps made from shell casings. On the left bank, in the Soviet zone, life was also subject to the rhythm of war. But here it was filled with furious work. Factories that could not be fully evacuated continued to operate in the open air or in semi-destroyed workshops. Tanks were repaired, mortars and the famous Katyushas were manufactured. Workers, often women and teenagers, stood at machines for 16 hours, and during breaks, when another air raid began, they took their places in self-defense units, extinguishing incendiary bombs on roofs. The city became a single organism, where every cog, every action was directed towards resistance. A special page in the annals of the defense was the Chizovsky Bridgehead. This was a small piece of land on the right, enemy-occupied bank in the southern part of the city. The Soviet command understood. To prevent the Germans from consolidating and transferring forces to Stalingrad, they had to be kept under constant tension, to gnaw into their defenses. The crossing to Chizovka became a legend of engineering thought and soldierly courage. Bridges were built underwater. Sappers laid decking half a meter below the river's surface. From the air, these crossings were invisible. For German pilots, it was just a smooth water surface. But at night, tanks and infantry moved across this water. Water flooded the engines, soldiers waded waist-deep in the icy current, but equipment was transported to the right bank, posing a constant threat to the German flank. The battles for Chizovka were fought with extreme ferocity. Every house here was turned into a pillbox by the Germans. Concrete fences of the private sector, stone cellars, everything was used for defense. Soviet assault groups had to burn out the enemy literally meter by meter. It was here that a special type of urban fighter emerged, who would later become a symbol of Soviet infantry. It was here that the medical instructor Zinaida Tusnolobova performed her feat. In a few days of fighting, she carried more than 120 wounded soldiers and officers from the battlefield. Crawling through snow and mud, under continuous fire, she saved lives until she herself received a severe wound that led to the loss of her arms and legs. Her story became known throughout the front, and inscriptions for Zina Tusnolobova appeared on the sides of tanks and planes, becoming a symbol of retribution. Another example of an unbending will was the feat of Lazar Zagania. In one of the battles on the Chizovsky Bridgehead, while covering the retreat of comrades and the regrouping of forces, he remained alone against the advancing enemy infantry. Taking up a favorable position in the ruins, he fired until the last bullet, tying up the actions of an entire enemy unit. When the ammunition ran out and the enemies approached closely, he did not surrender, choosing the path of a warrior, loyal to his oath until the end. Such moments, multiplied by thousands, created the very wall that the Wehrmacht could not break through. This was an internal layer of the conflict, a clash not just of tactics, but of characters, of spiritual strength. The Germans, technically better equipped, acting according to regulations, faced irrational, from their point of view, self-sacrifice and ingenuity. The German command, realizing that a swift capture of the entire city was impossible, and fearing getting bogged down in street fighting, decided to transfer the defense of the flanks to its allies. Thus, the Second Hungarian Army found itself in the steppes near Voronezh. This decision proved fatal. Hungarian soldiers, sent thousands of kilometers from home, poorly understood the goals of this war. Their equipment was unsuitable for the conditions of the harsh Russian winter, which was relentlessly approaching. Relations between German and Hungarian units were strained, often hostile. The Germans treated their allies with arrogance, taking the best accommodations, transport, and provisions for themselves. This created a deep crack in the monolith of the Axis. The Hungarians felt abandoned to their doom, a living shield for the master race. With the onset of autumn and then winter, the situation for the occupiers became catastrophic. The cold penetrated everywhere. German uniforms, beautiful for parades, proved useless in frosts of -20 and below. Grease in weapons froze, engines wouldn't start. Soviet troops, accustomed to the climate and having received warm equipment, felt more confident. The partisan movement in the enemy's rear gave them no peace. In the forests around Voronezh, detachments operated, disrupting communications, blowing up warehouses, and not allowing the occupiers to feel safe for a minute. The ideological conflict reached its climax. European rationalism clashed with Russian resilience. German officers wrote in their diaries that the Russians fought against all rules of military science. According to their calculations, the garrison should have capitulated back in July. But it was December, and the city was still biting back with fire. Voronezh became a symbol that the military machine of the Reich had malfunctioned. It was here that the myth of the invincibility of the German soldier in the summer campaign was dispelled. For the first time in the entire war, the front line stabilized for such a long period right in the middle of a major city. By January 1943, the situation on the fronts had changed fundamentally. The ring around Paulus's army had already closed near Stalingrad. The Stavka of the Supreme High Command decided to conduct a large-scale offensive operation on the Upper Don. The Voronezh-Kastornoye operation was conceived as a classic encircling strike. Soviet troops, having accumulated forces and means, secretly pulling up artillery and tank reserves, were preparing to deliver a crushing blow. General Chernyakhovsky, a young and talented commander who commanded the 60th Army, played a key role in planning and implementing the liberation of the city. On January 24th, the general offensive began. The artillery barrage was of such force that, according to eyewitnesses, the ground shook violently and the snow turned black from soot. The strike hit the positions of Hungarian and German troops. The Hungarian defense crumbled like a house of cards. Demoralized, frozen, and deprived of armored support, Hungarian units began a disorderly retreat, which quickly turned into a panicked flight. Huge columns of people, carts, and vehicles jammed the roads. Soviet assault aircraft, dominating the sky, delivered strike after strike against these concentrations. It was a complete rout. The Second Hungarian Army lost almost all its personnel and equipment. For Hungary, this became a national tragedy, the scale of which surpassed all previous military failures of that country. The Germans, realizing that the encirclement ring was about to close around them too, began a hasty withdrawal from Voronezh. But they were not allowed to leave peacefully. Soviet units pursued the retreating enemy, preventing them from consolidating on intermediate lines. Street battles erupted with renewed force, but now the attacking side was the Red Army. Assault groups cleared block after block. On January 25, 1943, soldiers of the 60th Army broke into the city center. A red banner was hoisted on the balcony of the Voronezh Hotel, one of the few surviving tall buildings on Lenin Square. This moment became a symbol of the final liberation. But a terrible scene unfolded before the eyes of the liberators. The city was dead. Of the 20,000 residential buildings that existed before the war, only a few dozen survived. Everything else was reduced to ruins. The skeletons of buildings with empty window sockets, mountains of broken bricks, twisted tram cars covered in snow. The Germans, employing a scorched earth tactic, blew up everything they could during their retreat. The building of the regional party committee, old mansions, theaters, hospitals, all lay in ruins. The famous rotunda of the regional hospital, a concrete frame with a shell-pierced dome, remained standing as a silent witness to barbarism. It was decided not to restore it, leaving it as an eternal monument to the city's pain. A deafening silence reigned in the streets of liberated Voronezh. Only a few rare residents came out to meet the liberators, those few who managed to survive the occupation, hiding in basements and ruins. Emaciated, in rags, blackened with soot, they wept, embracing the soldiers. The scenes of these encounters cannot be described without a tremor of the soul. People who had survived 212 days of hell saw in the Soviet soldiers not just an army, but saviors who had restored their right to life. In Peshkanoy Log, on the outskirts of the city, traces of a terrible crime committed by the occupiers were discovered. A place where hundreds of civilians and wounded patients from hospitals met their end. This discovery added grim determination to the hearts of the soldiers, who continued to drive the enemy westward. The significance of the victory near Voronezh is hard to overestimate. It was here that forces so desperately needed by Paulus at Stalingrad were pinned down and ground to dust. Around 30 enemy divisions got bogged down in battles for this city. Had they been transferred to the Volga, the outcome of the Battle of Stalingrad might have been different. Voronezh became a breakwater, shattering the German plan for the summer offensive. Moreover, the successful offensive near Voronezh and the subsequent operation created a salient in the front line, which would later become known as the Kursk Bulge. It was here, thanks to the successes of the Voronezh, Bryansk, and Southwestern fronts, that the prerequisites for the decisive battle of the summer of '43 were created. After liberation, another battle began, the battle for restoration. Experts who arrived in the city shook their heads and wrote in their reports that Voronezh was beyond repair, that it would be simpler to build a new city from scratch. The degree of destruction was 92%. There were more mines, shells, and aerial bombs in the ground than stones. But the residents decided otherwise. They began to return, first individually, then with families. They lived in dugouts, in hastily equipped basements. Their first priority was not housing, but factories and the railway, understanding that the front still needed help. Women, old people, and children cleared debris by hand. Every cleaned brick went into production. This was a labor feat equal to a military feat. The city rose from the ashes against all predictions, becoming even more beautiful and majestic. Today's Voronezh preserves the memory of those events in street names, in monuments, and in its very layout. Lysyukov Street is named after the general who died defending the city. The Chizhovsky Foothold has been transformed into a memorial complex, where thousands of defenders rest in a mass grave. The Monument of Glory on Moskovsky Prospect greets everyone entering the city from the north. But perhaps the most poignant monument remains that very rotunda. It stands amidst modern blocks, reminding us of the price paid for silence and a peaceful sky. The lessons of the defense of Voronezh extend beyond military history. This is a story about how spirit is stronger than matter, that a city is not walls and bridges, but people, that underestimating the enemy and arrogance always lead to defeat. The Germans saw Voronezh as merely a geographical point, but encountered the collective soul of a people that cannot be broken. This is also a lesson about the fragility of alliances built on aggression. At a critical moment, each participant of the Axis thought only of their own salvation, abandoning their comrades in arms. 212 days of Voronezh's defense is an epic saga of courage, pain, and triumph. It reminds us, descendants, that the world we live in was paid for with millions of lives interrupted or mutilated by war. The history of this city teaches us not to give up even in the most hopeless situations, to believe in victory when there are only ruins around, and to preserve humanity amidst inhuman cruelty. As long as we remember the feat of Voronezh's defenders, their sacrifice has meaning, and their voices, echoing through the decades, warn us against the unacceptability of repeating such a tragedy. This warrior city, this worker city, has earned its right to eternal glory, becoming an indestructible bastion against the darkness that tried to engulf the world. And looking today at the wide expanse of the Voronezh Reservoir, hiding the old riverbed under its waters, we must see not just a landscape but a sacred place where the fate not only of one country but of all humanity was decided.